welcome back to the Cross Border Interviews special live edition. And I am honored, extremely honored, to have our guest into the studio today. He is the leader of the Sinn Féin in the, I'm going to pronounce the name of the government building that you sit in, the Seanad.
Not far off. You're close.
Okay.
We'll talk that out as we get through the interview.
There we
Chris.
go. Senator Niall Donnghaile. Senator Niall, thank you so much for doing this. It's an honor.
You're very welcome.
Before I get started on the reason why you're in Canada today, I've always started my interviews off with politicians the exact same way. So you're no exception to this. Where did your sense of duty to serve come from, Niall?
Well, I suppose for me, it probably came from a sense of being active in my community more so than any, vision of serving or having an elected role. I come from a political family, a family that were involved in Irish republicanism and Republican activism at home for a long number of years. But I think in the first instance, I always had an interest in politics. I always had an interest in Irish history. I always had an interest in what was going on around me. I grew up in an era that saw the conflict in the north of Ireland coming towards an end, the introduction of peace talks, and then subsequently the Good Friday Agreement. So that kind of happened in parallel with my formative years. So you had that at the higher macro political level, and then obviously at a more localized level you had the day-to-day community issues that every community, every inner city, urban community deals with, and then also the very specific needs of a community that is emerging from conflict and that is emerging from a history of oppression, a history of sectarianism, a history of essentially being treated as second class, and how you overcome all of those universal challenges, but also those very unique challenges. So for me, it was really fundamental questions. It was like, why can't young people in this community that I live in get a house? Why are we politicized in the overtly security way and militarized way that we are? Why are there peace walls dividing my community from the community on the other side of the wall? Why don't we have a football pitch to play sports in this community? So it's that, I suppose, bespoke North of Ireland experience, coupled with what I'm sure would be familiar to a lot of your own followers, those day-to-day community regeneration, social issues that really steered me towards firstly getting involved with Sinn Féin locally, because, to be quite frank, and I would say this, but it's true, they were the only political party that I saw in my area that I engaged with, that I was obviously familiar with through my family, and who ultimately actually did any work on the ground. So that was important to me, and that's why I made the decision, I suppose, in my teenage years to get involved with Sinn Féin.
I've done some research on you before you've sat down. I haven't done a lot because I try to learn from my guests. You, Councillor first, then Lord Mayor of Belfast, and then Senator. You started early in your career, which is very unusual, particularly here in Canada. I'm not sure how it is in Ireland, but in Canada, you don't get a lot of youth that are stepping up and putting their name on the ballot. Why was it important for you at a young age to get up and say, I want to be a councillor in this election?
Well, a number of reasons, to be frank with you, Chris. I suppose initially, like anyone, I didn't, again, as I mentioned, I didn't really see my role in frontline elected politics. We had a council seat, Sinn Féin gained a council seat in 2001, if memory serves me right, and then we lost that council seat in 2005. We had never had a council seat in the area before. We had always come very tantalisingly close, but the area that I live in and where our council constituency boundary is a predominantly unionist, loyalist constituency. So I very much live in a small Catholic, nationalist, Republican enclave in that part of Belfast. So it was always very difficult for us just numerically to have enough votes, enough people there to actually hit the back of the net. And in 2001, we did it. We saw the change and the difference that made, having someone specifically with a voice, being a voice for our community, for our constituency in City Hall, where important decisions were made. And then in 2005, when we lost that, we felt that difference quite acutely, having had it and then having lost it. So when the party approached me in, I think it was late 2005, early 2006 possibly, I can't quite remember, maybe 2007 even, and asked would I consider taking on the role as the party's representative in the constituency, ultimately to go back to try and regain the seat in 2011. And we would have had an earlier election, but there was a sort of legislative process going through there that was changing the system of local government, so it delayed council elections for a year, really. So in 2011 I ran and I was elected councillor, and I got in over quota, which we were happy about, which surprised me and surprised quite a lot of people, I think, and that was quite a big night for me, for my family, but also importantly for the community too. So we were determined that we would get to work on issues that were important to people.
We can talk about your time as Lord Mayor, but that's not why you're here. You're here to talk about why you're in Canada. But before we do that, I want to pose this question to you, because there probably are some people who will be listening to this later on, and even right now, who are saying, what's a Sinn Féin? Because we're Canadians. What is this political party? Because we're used to liberal, conservative, NDP. So in your words, what does the Sinn Féin stand for, and what does it represent?
Well, we stand for core, I suppose, Irish Republican politics and republicanism in its truest sense. That the people are sovereign, that we create a society where people are equal. Where, I suppose, in the modern understanding of Irish republicanism, I think, would be very open, very progressive, very international in terms of our, and this is actually a trait of Irish republicanism going back a very long time. We have always looked internationally for solidarity and for support, whether that was in terms of liberation struggle and nation building, whether that was in terms of our peace process and the Good Friday Agreement, or even if it's now where we have looked for international solidarity in terms of Brexit, and protecting the peace process, ensuring that the protocol prevails, and also now the fundamental reason as to why I'm here, building continued support for Irish reunification and engaging the Good Friday Agreement provision for a referendum on that issue. So we envisage a fair Ireland, we envisage a united Ireland, we envisage a real republic that treats citizens equally, that treats them well, that provides them with the fundamentals in life: a good home, an accessible job, a proper, universal and free healthcare system for people.
You are on a cross Canada tour, and I shouldn't say you, because there is another member of this, another senator from Ireland that is also, but on the other side of Canada. You've got the west side, she's got the east side. Why Canada? Why come to Canada? Because I think that's the big question that I had when I saw this organization. I was like, seems weird that you're coming to Canada. You think you'd stay more in a European sense, but you've come to Canada on part of the, and I want to make sure I get this name correct here, the Friends of the Sinn Féin Canada. So why come to Canada?
I suppose the question is, why not come to Canada?
I guess so.
And to be honest, I mean, as I say, and I don't say it kind of lightly, Chris, Irish Republicans have always looked internationally, even at a time when it was difficult, even at a time when it wasn't as accessible to reach international friends and supporters. We've always done it. But now, obviously, Ireland has a huge diaspora. It has, there are 70 million people around the world who claim Irish lineage and Irish heritage. Obviously, a large proportion of that is in Canada and North America more generally. And I think, in terms of even, the experiences of conflict and support for building peace, and you'll remember the presence of General de Chastelain, going back in terms of our peace process. He oversaw the decommissioning of paramilitary weapons from within loyalism. He oversaw the decommission of IRA weapons, all part of the peace process. So Canada has been present in this process. It has been present in, a long period of Irish history. There is an Irish community here, but we're not speaking to them exclusively. I mean, I took the opportunity in Vancouver yesterday to meet a range of elected officials, and to tell them about Ireland, to tell them about what's happening currently, and really to tell them and ask for their support for the call for a referendum on Irish unity, which is, as I said, is part of an agreed provision of the Good Friday Agreement. That agreement's lodged at the European Union, it's lodged at the United Nations. The British and Irish government are co-guarantors of that agreement. The US has a particular vested interest in that, and very much, as I think President Biden has said, sees themselves as a guarantor of that agreement as well, as do the European institutions, because the European institutions were key in terms of the very early days of the peace process, in investing in communities, in funding infrastructural projects that really ensured that once demilitarization along the border happened and the British Army were vacated from along the border and those security posts, that European money could support really progressive, popular infrastructure investments that ensured that border really became invisible. And while it was there, I suppose, from a political, legislative, territorial point of view, many of us, never did, don't, and won't ever recognise that border. But it's much easier for people who maybe don't have the same politics that I would hold when it really isn't visible and doesn't impact on their day-to-day lives. So that's why people were so worried about Brexit, and that's why Brexit came so to the fore in terms of its potential impact on Ireland. And that's why I think it was so important that early on in the negotiations that there were agreed principles between the UK government, between the European Union, that ensured that there would be no threat to the Good Friday Agreement, that there would be no return to a hard border. And that's why it's so reckless that the British government are now, it's not particularly surprising to Irish people given our experience, are regressing from those commitments. They seem determined to take us down a path that would jeopardise the Good Friday Agreement, that could potentially see hardening of a border in Ireland. And this is all after a protocol which they signed up to, they agreed, they put through their parliament, and now they want to say, one British minister actually said that they would be prepared to break that agreement, to break the law, if I'm quoting him correctly, in a limited and specific way.
Now, is this and I apologize because there was just a transition of governments from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss. Is this the Liz Truss government we're talking about?
This was the Boris Johnson.
Is this does the Irish government and the people of the yourself, like a senator, do they have some better feeling with this current new United Kingdom Prime Minister, or is there still apprehension because it's same party, different face?
Well, it's very early days into the term, and obviously the term is going to be dominated over the next short while with obviously the death of Queen Elizabeth II. So I suppose in many ways we have to wait and see. Liz Truss has been involved in this process. She's been the Foreign Secretary, and she has led the British side of negotiations for quite some time now. I have to say, her rhetoric throughout the course of her leadership campaign wasn't particularly settling. She has appointed a Secretary of State for the North of Ireland and a junior minister for the North of Ireland, both of whom are former chairs of the European Research Group, which is quite a die-hard Brexit cadre within the British Tory party. So I think that sends a particular signal of intent at this stage. But I do remain confident that with international goodwill, solidarity from places like Canada, from the European Union, who are remaining steadfast in protecting the Good Friday Agreement, protecting Irish interests, and indeed statements from President Biden and Congressman Richard Neil and others.
Have you heard anything from Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, or any major elected official that have come out in support of a referendum type situation where they would see a unification of Northern Ireland and Ireland?
Well, I know that Friends of Sinn Fein here in Canada have been engaging, whether we're here or not, they continue to engage with elected officials. They have received a number of endorsements from elected officials from it, and it's bipartisan, by the way, for that referendum going forward. And that's part of what I'm asking people to do here now. Not to take necessarily a particular stance on the outcome of that referendum. I suppose what we're saying is give us the opportunity to have our say. Next year, the Good Friday Agreement will reach a quarter of a century in terms of coming of age. So there is a generation that has grown up post-conflict in a peace process. And they want to have the opportunity to have their say on this important issue, and particularly post-Brexit, when such fundamental things that were taken for granted and taken for read have been thrown up in the air. There are people who wouldn't come from the tradition and the community that I come from, would come from the Unionist community and have their allegiance to the United Kingdom, but they valued their European identity, they valued their European citizenship, they valued the benefits and the entitlements that membership of the European Union brought to them personally, to their families, to their community, and they don't, the very ultra nationalist British approach of the Tories in London doesn't chime with them. So while they don't necessarily want to give up their Britishness, they don't want to give up their allegiance to Britain's royal family, for example. They don't want to give up their own culture and their own traditions. They are starting to ask the questions about, okay, well, what would life look like for me in a united Ireland, in a reunified situation? And certainly for those of us who advocate for Irish unity, we have to sit down and engage and plan out appropriately, prepare for that change, and reassure people that there won't be a replication of what was done onto us and those who come from my tradition onto anyone else in that scenario. So that's why I think planning and preparing for a referendum is so key, and why the Irish government really need to step up to the mark in terms of that. Because if Brexit showed us one thing, it's how not to do a referendum. It's how not to ask an important constitutional question. You don't go into this blind. You don't go into this with lies painted across the side of a big red bus. You go in here with the correct detail, with the correct information, with the proper engagement, and with, I think, the very necessary interaction and conversation and reconciliation between communities.
Does it give the people of Ireland and Northern Ireland sort of a sense of hope that there is a referendum that is upcoming in 2023 in Scotland, whether they want to separate, that we could potentially see a referendum on this reunification issue and put it out and settle it once and for all? Whether it may go one way or the other, we need to have the referendum, because until we do, people are just going to keep on talking about it, and nothing's ever going to change until actually people have the ability to vote.
Yeah, and I think, not to be cheesy or cliched about it, I actually think hope is really key to it all, because what we have in Ireland is something that the Scots would give their right arm for, and that is an actual agreed provision for a referendum. We have it within the Good Friday Agreement, albeit it's within the gift of the Secretary of State to trigger that referendum. We have it, and there are so many pillars of what was understood to be accepted in perpetuity. Those pillars have fallen. The political unionist majority, which was meant to be inbuilt into the state when it was formed just 101 years ago, has gone. Over the last number of Legislative Assembly elections, Westminster elections, and indeed when we had last European elections, the political unionist majority is gone. And that wasn't meant to happen. Sinn Fein is now the largest party in the north of Ireland. Michelle O'Neill, our party vice president, is the First Minister designate. So that sends a signal in of itself that fundamentals have changed. And I think people are up for it, particularly younger people, when they don't just look at the historic obligation of Irish unity, but when they look at the big societal changes that have taken place in the south of Ireland around marriage equality, around the repeal of the Eighth Amendment, and a woman's right to choose. Those are all issues that have shown that what people maybe understood as Irish society, possibly quite devout Catholic right wing, isn't necessarily the case anymore. And when you couple that with the potential of Irish unity and actually starting anew, reimagining a new Ireland, it's not just about, okay, well, let's bolt the north onto the south and the south onto the north and hope for the best. That's why we're advocating for, this being our decade of opportunity, that we do initiate the necessary planning, the necessary engagement, the necessary research, and look to other examples around the world of constitutional change where similar referenda and change has taken place. So there's a lot of hope in there, and it isn't just talking about. I don't think, and I don't sense when I engage with people out there, and certainly not from this perspective of my own party, it's not just about let's talk simply about removing the border. It's talking about what kind of healthcare system we want. How do we deal with the acute housing problem for people out there? Just what seems to be the unattainable prospect of having a home of your own for many, many people. Let's talk about the energy crisis and how we create our own sustainable energy sources in Ireland and utilise the abundance of natural resources that are there for us, as opposed to in the past selling them off to the highest bidder. So that's the kind of, I think, conversation that first of all needs to happen, but I think it's also a conversation that people are up for, because whether it's north or south, people want a change. People are hungry for a change because the current system, the current arrangements really aren't delivering for them. So we have this opportunity. You know, other countries around the world would probably love to talk about the opportunity of change that we have. We have the opportunity to reimagine Ireland as a real republic, as a republic that guarantees, religious and civil liberty, as the proclamation of our own independence that says that we cherish all the children of the nation equally.
Do you think if there was a referendum held today, you'd win?
I would hope so. I'd want to win it. I'd work my backside off to win it. To be
Always
quite
the $1
honest.
million question.
But I suppose you go into every election not knowing the outcome. But rest assured, certainly.
Like, is there a want and a need
Yes.
right now that people are saying, okay, enough's enough, let's put it on the line and let's have the referendum?
The momentum around that is something that I have not experienced in my lifetime. And I am someone who, no matter what political forum or chamber I entered, no matter what room I entered, the advocating for Irish unity was always front and centre in my political mind. But there isn't a day now where you don't have the launch of another academic research paper or an economic paper or another politician coming out, whether domestically or internationally, saying that, we need this change. You have a huge mobilisation around civic society in the north and throughout Ireland. You have people within sports all coming out and saying, look, we need to have this conversation. The prudent thing to do, the leaderly thing to do, the responsible thing to do is to have this conversation. If Brexit again has taught us anything, it's that we can't jump into this on a whim, that we need to ensure that, particularly those of us who want to win it, that we win it as best we can. But even if we don't necessarily champion that referendum, there are people there who might be somewhat kind of indifferent, but they want to have all of the information at hand when it comes to making the vote. I think even probably the most diehard opponent, would still be an opponent, but they recognise that whether it's in a year or whether it's in 5 years, this question is going to be asked because, societal changes, demographic changes, political, economic changes are all taking place around us.
I know you're in no rush to get to your next event and have lunch here in Calgary. Well, first off, welcome to Calgary. I guess I should have said that beforehand.
No. Literally just fresh off the plane.
Literally fresh off the plane. His first stop was the cross-border interviews. That's right. We're going international. I want to ask one last question, and then we're going to pitch your event that's coming up tomorrow in Okotoks. We are in a transition in England right now, and in the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth II did meet with the leader at the time, Sinn Fein, and they shook hands, and this was a huge step forward for mending those relationships. Is this movement from the government that is not really doing anything right now on the realm of this, how do I put this correctly, this referendum that you want called, gonna be sort of not even in anyone's radar probably for the next 2-3 years because of the transition from Queen Elizabeth to King Charles now?
Well, I mean, first of all, like I acknowledge the deep loss that people are feeling, not least in Canada, but at home in Ireland and indeed in Britain at the loss of Queen Elizabeth. You're right to mention, I think, the very significant symbolic steps that she took when she visited Dublin initially, and bowed her head in honour of the people who fought for Irish freedom. That was a very significant acknowledgement, and I think it's one that resonated with me and people like me as well. I think you would be a terribly begrudging person if you were to, not acknowledge the significance of that. I'm a Republican and will advocate for Republican politics, but we are in a period now where people will be feeling a deep sense of loss, and I acknowledge and recognise that and extend my sympathies to them. Do I think the momentum about this issue can be held back? Will it dissipate? No. I think the genie is out of the bottle in relation to the question of Irish reunification, and that is going to remain front and centre of politics in Ireland, and it will have a big presence in British and European and broader international politics going forward as well. But I acknowledge we're in a period now where lots of people will be mourning the loss of Queen Elizabeth. It's a difficult time for her family, but she did meet Martin McGuinness, a former IRA leader, our chief negotiator throughout the peace process, and Deputy First Minister for a number of years in the north of Ireland. Martin, unfortunately, is no longer with us either. He passed away a number of years ago too. But again, our current leaders in Sinn Féin, Mary Lou MacDonald and Michelle O'Neill, have met with Queen Elizabeth before her passing, have met with then Prince, now King Charles, all of whom have been prepared to play a role in improving relations between Britain and Ireland, and indeed in taking steps towards reconciliation. And to be fair, I think we have not just acknowledged that, but have reciprocated that hand as Irish Republicans, and our own experience of loss and hurt caused by what the British royal family and the British monarch are emblematic of, what they're symbolic of. So that's part of nation building, that's part of peace, that's part of reconciliation, and I think we have shown by example that Sinn Féin and Irish Republicans are up for that.
Last question. You are in Vancouver last night. You're in Okotoks tomorrow, part of the Friends of the Sinn Féin in Canada. You are going to be at the Crystal Ridge Golf Club, and I just want to make sure I read this. 9 Crystal Green Lakes, Okotoks, Alberta, Saturday, September 10th from 4 to 7. Who can come? Is it open to anyone? Is it open for everyone and anyone to show up?
It's open to everyone who has an interest in Ireland, who has an interest in the peace process, who may not even know the first thing about Ireland, but just want to come along and learn a bit more. I've visited Canada a number of times. I was over on the far side before. I've been to Toronto a number of times, I've been to Ottawa a number of times, I've been to Montreal a number of times, and this is my first time on this side of the country.
So this is your first visit to Calgary?
This is my first visit to Calgary.
Oh, you have lots to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Driving right now.
Tell me where the best coffee is.
Tim Hortons.
Tim Hortons. Do you know we even have Tim Hortons in Belfast now too, believe it or not, and it's very popular. But yeah, it's open to everyone and anyone. I welcome the opportunity. I had a great public meeting in Vancouver last night where we had people from the Irish community, recent immigrants from Ireland to Vancouver, and also people who have just always had a great gra, what we call in Irish, a great love for Ireland, and just want to see that historic obligation and job of reuniting the country in peace, in reconciliation, fulfilled. So to Fáilte Rómh, you're very welcome. Come along, and I look forward to seeing as many people as possible tomorrow night.
Awesome. So remember, that's Saturday, September 10th from 4 to 7 at the Crystal Ridge Golf Club in Okotoks. If you want, head out, because it will probably be a fun night. It will be 3 hours with the Senator. He spent a half hour here, and I appreciate everything you've done. Even to sit down with you for a half hour has been a wonderful experience. So thank you so much, Niall.
Thank you, Chris.
So with that, I want to remind everyone, get out from behind social media for at least 5 minutes a day and go have a conversation with somebody, because you know what? Twitter is not the end-all be-all of what Canada is all about. So with that, have yourself an excellent day, and remember, keep talking, everyone.